started. So most of you know me. I'm Jessie Mahoney, and I am a pediatrician, and I do a lot of life coaching, and I did physician wellness for 20 years. I think I still do it. And these days I do coaching and tons of yoga and retreats. Sandra has joined me on a retreat. It's so nice to see you. And I also do a podcast, which we were just talking about. So if anyone doesn't listen to the podcast, a lot of the coaching that I share here, I share a lot of coaching tools in the podcast as well. So it's another way to get a lot of these same tools in a different way and a different format. And sometimes I love the way that coaching works is you can get it in these different formats. So you can get it in yoga, you can get it through actual coaching and that one-on-one piece of that, but you can also learn the tools on retreats, on mountaintops. You can learn them listening to the podcast and all kinds of other ways too. So I also like to just share a little bit about me for those of you who don't know me. I am a mom of 3 young adults now. Even my last one's almost an adult. That's a little bit scary. And a new grandma. So I have a 6-week-old grandson, and I am I like to be very transparent. I'm in a neurodiverse marriage, which I only learned about 6 years ago, and I'm about to celebrate my 30th anniversary. So I have a lot of tips on marriage coaching, and that's kind of me at this point in life. I'm sure there's more, but that's the gist of me. And in these sessions, I mostly do them. A lot of people say, why do you have free coaching? Because it's fun. And it gives me a chance to catch up with people. And as most of you know, I also do free yoga. And it gives me a chance to connect with more and more people across the world. And that has brought me a lot of joy and other people a lot of joy. The other reason I do them is that as physicians, we are trained to be skeptical. And I know Sandra's skeptical of things too. And so I like to just honor that. And because we're trained to be skeptical, and because we're like, well, I have to know if it's going to work out, we're very outcome oriented. So I find that when people come to these sessions and they get to know me and they see a little bit about what coaching is, they can move past that skepticism, which allows them to get the benefit. And I left my practice to do coaching full-time because it changes lives and it brings tremendous benefit to so many people. I'm a pediatrician. And so for me, families are really important. The next generation is really important. The patients are really important. Your home life is really important. All of it benefits from coaching. And so what I love to do is give people a little taste of it here and there so they get to experience it. And that I will say so many people who come end up working with me in some way, whether they come to a retreat, whether they join one of the groups, whether they work one-on-one, whether they come to yoga and then do one of those things. And so to me, it's a beautiful way to gift this work to people who otherwise might be skeptical and just sit at home thinking, I don't know if that will work, or I'm only going to do it if I know it will work. So I see it as really more of a benevolent action. So what I try to do in these sessions is share a couple of tools so people get something to take home with them no matter what they came for, and answer questions. So if people have questions or hesitations, like, well, many people say I don't have time to do coaching. And I would say that it's one of the things that gives you time, for example. So we can talk about that because we spend a lot less time worrying and stewing on other things, or whatever other objections, hesitations, worries, concerns, thoughts that you have, questions about it. It is for many people a new way of thinking. And again, it is not the way that we were taught to think in medicine. So most of you are likely in medicine, and I think it's really helpful to just ask your questions. And then I'm happy to do some coaching. So if someone is stuck on things, thinking about making a change, anything like that, we'll do a little bit of coaching there. So one of the things I thought I'd start with tonight is just this idea of what mindful coaching is versus coaching, because I actually blend both mindfulness and coaching together on purpose. And I'm trained as a yoga teacher, so I have mindfulness training, and I'm also trained as a coach. And what I have discovered is that putting the two together is synergistic. And so if you do one or the other, you don't get nearly as much benefit. So a lot of people say, well, mindfulness is evidence-based for burnout. It's evidence-based for stress. So it definitely helps you. And coaching is evidence-based for those things also. Together, they actually work synergistically and help people make change, especially people who are maybe stuck or struggling to make decisions. And many of us in medicine, we get stuck more easily because of a lot of the physician thought patterns we have. And I'm going to talk about a few of those tonight as well. The other thing about mindful coaching is that it's not goal focused. So it's not focused on like, maybe getting that perfect job. I like to think of it as feeling focused. So we often know how we want to feel in life. Maybe why you moved across the country, for example, you know how you want to feel in life, but you don't know what that job looks like or what you're going to do to help you feel that way. But when you can connect with how you want to feel, it's much easier to work backwards. And there are certain coaching models that we use there. And so that's where I like to think of it as mindfulness, because most of us can mindfully connect to feelings and emotions and how we would like to feel, getting out of that rational mind of my job should have a list of these benefits and, and these outcomes. And so I find it a really helpful way to help people end up doing something they actually want to be doing rather than what they think they should be doing. And usually in the end, it also meets those other requirements. I was actually just reading a book on decision-making, and she talks about how our lists of pros and cons actually helps us make much worse decisions, and that's actually a terrible decision-making tool. And so, and it makes sense when you start to think about what the value of the criteria, because it doesn't value the criteria in the same way, and it doesn't value what you want out of life in the same way. And so coaching really gets into a lot of that feelings and alignment in who you want to be. So that's really why I bring in mindfulness. And then I wanted to bring in this idea of the way I approach mindful coaching. It's a little bit different than a lot of coaches approach it, in that the first step is really noticing and being aware and understanding your thought patterns and understanding these unhelpful thought patterns that many of us have as physicians, and many of them were trained into us. So if you think about like a scarcity mindset, an urgency and catastrophizing and doubting ourselves, I can go on forever on these, but like rumination and worrying in advance and over responsibility. And I'm seeing all these nodding heads, like self-sacrifice and martyrdom and right and wrong. And some other ones, hard is better and easy is not valuable. All of these things color all of our decisions because we think in that way and we were trained to think in that way. And so a big part of the work of mindful coaching is to notice and become aware of all of those thought patterns. And there are a ton of them. And we actually spend time going through a lot of them in group coaching and or in one-on-one coaching, but really important to begin to see those and to begin to see the impact that they have on your life. So when you can see them and you can see the impact of them, the shame, blame, and guilt patterns are some of the big ones, and trying to always fix, manage, and control things. Those give us a life that we don't necessarily want. And so the biggest thing is noticing them. The second piece is realizing that, and I like to just say they're not our fault because most of them are trained into us. And so when you're coming at it from this perspective that they're not your fault, you are no longer in shame, blame, and guilt. And that's where your amygdala can learn and change. When we're in judgment and shame, blame, and guilt, we don't make change. And so I like to just say they're not our fault. And I actually kind of believe that, knowing the training process that most of us went to, and everyone here is a woman. And so some of these thought patterns also were gifted to us as women in our culture. And so we have sort of a double whammy. And then I also like to point out that noticing them is the key thing. So a lot of us think, okay, well, I have these thought patterns, I have to change them. And in mindful coaching, 90% of the benefit comes in understanding them and seeing how they impact you. You can change them and you will change them eventually, but there is no urgency to change them and there's no rush to change them, because once you notice them, they lose a lot of their power and they lose a lot of their impact. So that to me is the first reason why we bring mindfulness in. And then the second reason is that you can't change when you're in some pathomimetic storm or threatened. And most of us live in that constant state. And so bringing in mindfulness, and again, the mindfulness is a lot of the noticing. It can be breathing, it can be yoga. It doesn't have to be sitting on your mat for 45 minutes. I just like to point out there's tons of different ways to do it. And I feel like there's a way for everyone to do it. So I work with people until we figure out a way that works for them. I'm not a traditional meditator, 45 minutes on the mat. I like to do mindfulness in nature. That's what works for me, or yoga. And I actually got into yoga because I really struggled to sit on my mat and meditate and like follow the rules. I still do. But when I'm moving, I can be much more mindful. And so we all approach it in a slightly different way. And then you have to bring compassion into it, which is a big piece of the mindfulness also. And so if you're here judging and being mean to yourself, which is another thought pattern, common behavior that we all have in medicine, we think that's the way forward and we are so good at it. We don't make change from that sort of judgmental, threatened way. Shuts down our amygdala. And we know, like in neuroscience, that that's not the way to rewire your brain, which is what you're doing in coaching. And then the other place that we really cannot make change is from a place of depletion and exhaustion and empty. And so for me, the mindfulness is really focusing on repleting you and noticing what energizes you. It's one of the reasons that I do retreats, because we focus on the repletion. We just take care of it right there in the moment. But you can also do it at home once you're noticing and aware of what you need to be repleting yourself, and to understand that when we can step out of this hurry and actually focus on that re-energizing and refilling your cup, that's where the coaching works. So I see a lot of people getting into trouble just being mean to themselves about what hasn't worked, or I know that I'm supposed to think it this way and it's not working. And so sort of refilling your cup actually really helps a lot of that stuff stick and stay and last. And so sometimes people say, well, I do coaching and it didn't stick. Without mindfulness, it doesn't stick. And I use mindfulness in the way that all of those things are brought into it. And then the last bit is really the mindset traditional coaching tools. And so when you've learned to pause, when you've taken care of your nervous system, then you can make these mindset shifts and looking at your thought patterns, and you can work on changing them. Your brain is much more receptive to different ways of thinking and shifting perspective and creative solutions. And so from that standpoint, you can start to look at some of these simple catchphrases. What's your favorite one, Sandra, that you're still using? Picking on you, of course, but I know you've got one.
So you mean catchphrase, things I tell myself all the time? Or?
Yeah.
Well, just probably that I should be doing something.
Okay. And what do you say instead? Because now you notice that you're saying that.
Yeah. I choose to do something.
Yeah. So that's one of the things that we talked about at the retreat, is instead of like, I should, it's like, I choose to, or I get to, or I want to. And so changing even that one word all of a sudden changes all the energy. And then you're not in this sort of angsty, frustrated spot, and everything feels really different. Some of the other ones that I think are helpful is not about me. That's something I use. I used to think that, when I worked in clinic, people would say things or do things, staff or colleagues, and it's almost always not about you. It's about their own depletion or about their own situation. Even family member stuff is usually not about you, except that we are all trained to think it is about us. And we were trained to think that we can control all of that if we act in a different way or are a different way. And so that is one of my favorite simple phrases. So there are many different things in coaching. There's a whole body of work about different ways of thinking about things, or telling different stories, for example, changing your language. And asking good questions is another tool that we do a lot of in coaching. And so we can talk about some of these and or dive into coaching. And I think when you've done that pre-work, the mindfulness work, and you now have the pause and you have the space to actually do some of this rewiring, that coaching piece becomes really natural and actually much faster than it otherwise is, and it sticks. And so it doesn't stick forever. I do think that one of the really important things is to not be in a rush and not be urgent to make things just change overnight, because what I find is people who stick with this work over time, they just become a new person. They think about things differently and they don't fall back into those old habits. But you've been practicing these old thoughts that I mentioned forever. most of you, your whole life. And so it takes time to begin to shift out of them. You notice them, and then you're like, oh, here I'm shoulding again. And so let me think, I'm going to choose to do this instead, or I'm going to say I get to do this, or I want to do this, as opposed to I have to, staying out of that victimhood spot. And so your brain can actually learn to focus on things differently. A couple other things I was going to mention is this idea of coming from your strengths rather than your weaknesses. And so coaching, we really work on this idea of what are you really good at and optimizing the things you're great at. We were all taught to focus on all the things we're bad at and really work at those with our negativity bias, looking at what's wrong. And we don't get nearly as far, and we don't enjoy our lives as much as if we come from the strength-based and alignment-based approach. And so coaching really helps you learn about that as well. And then one of the other things I just like to bring up and kind of as kind of an introduction to coaching is that coaching is changing your thoughts, but there are many times when we also need to change our circumstances. So many people need to leave their job, change their job, but they want to do that first, and they don't clean up their mindset first, in the sense that they're like, I'll just get out of this job and I'll feel better. But then they either don't know where to go, or they move to another job and they don't feel better anyway because they didn't clean up their thinking. And so I really like to pay attention to when to change your thoughts and when to make a change. And the way that I like to think about it is you want to change your thoughts first either way. And when you've changed your thoughts, then you can make the change, and it usually works out well. And you're also making a change from a place of alignment. And so we don't want to just immediately jump to that change. Unless your situation is, as I like to say, toxic, then sometimes you actually need to get out of it. Or sometimes you make the change and then you pause and then you do the work. Or I've had people that give notice, but they have to give 6 months notice. And so they have plenty of time to do the work to figure out what's next. And so realizing that we have very much of an urgency bias, and I call it urgency tax. We want to change it and fix it. And we think there's a there. And so what coaching really teaches you is that changing the situation isn't going to change the circumstances unless you also understand how to manage your mind. And the smarter your mind, the actually harder it is to manage. That's why coaching works for people with very smart brains, because we're like overdriving in our brain all the time, trying to make things work. And so that's where the mindfulness piece and the relaxing in allows you to start to rewire and think about things differently, so you can approach things differently going forward and actually end up doing things that are in alignment that you actually want to be doing rather than what you should be doing, if that makes sense. So I think from here, I'm happy to answer. Do people have questions, thoughts about coaching? I can answer specific questions, and I'm also happy to kind of jump into coaching. If anybody wants to get coached on something, let me know. Does anyone have any questions? Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, hi, I'm Nina. I'm in New York. I just had a question about individual versus group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think well, I'm curious what your specific question. I'll give a little overview, and then you can tell me where you're struggling. But they both work, and there isn't a better one. So one of the other default thought patterns that we have is there's a right or a wrong, and there's the best way to do it. And there isn't a best way. There might be a way that feels more comfortable to you. There is tremendous benefit to individual and tremendous benefit to group. So the individual, of course, is focused on you, and it's focused on your mindset. And so a lot of us have, we call it like the special snowflake, like it's harder for me to change, or my situation is different, and this is why. And so the one-on-one really allows you to focus on your situation. I like to think of it as efficient, right? Because you're diving right into exactly where your brain is stuck, as opposed to where other people's brains might be stuck. And in group sessions, we do a little bit more teaching, kind of like the beginning of this, although usually it's even more targeted, and people have been doing coaching for a while, so they understand, they have some background to it. But there you actually get to see other people struggling with similar things. And so first of all, people feel not alone. They feel like they belong. They feel like there's not something wrong with their brain. You also sometimes have insight into things that you're struggling with that you didn't even know you're struggling with. So many people actually do both at the same time. And I think that is ideal. They don't have to necessarily be side by side, but they might do a round of one-on-one coaching and then they'll join one of the groups afterwards. I think that's ideal because you've tackled your own personal issues. And then you get this tremendous benefit from seeing what other people are struggling with. But Sandra, for example, went on a retreat, which is pretty much group coaching. And I think that you can start there, but then often people really do want to spend some time on their own issues, and or maybe they think their own issue, which a lot of us think is they don't want to bring it up in a group to start. By the end, everybody brings it up, but in the beginning, they think maybe they don't want to. And so I think for people who feel like they want that privacy, that can be another way to do it. I would say that ultimately you can get what you need from either. What I see is the group coaching is one of those things that really broadens your mind in the end and allows that coaching to integrate for the long term. And so most people that have a really successful journey will do both, honestly. It doesn't matter where you start, but I do see people who maybe do some group coaching and never get any one-on-one, and then they're still stuck in their own stories. If you, in the group coaching, are willing to bring up your own stories and really allow yourself to be coached in front of everyone else, you can get all that. But a lot of people tend to hesitate there. If they never hesitate if they've already had one-on-one coaching because they know how it's working and they know it's safe and they know that they're going to get more out of it by diving in. But you want to know yourself a little bit. It doesn't mean that there's a right answer or a better answer. I will tell you that for me, I personally like one-on-one as the coachee, because my brain is all about efficiency. So I'm like, well, I just want to tackle this thing. And that's just knowing myself. And so sometimes when I'm in groups, it's, you have to know that you will attend and you will try to take each person who's being coached. And that's one of the things that I bring up in group coaching. They may be getting coached on something that doesn't apply to you at all, but it always applies to you. It's like, how does this concept of, scarcity mindset or catastrophizing or self-doubt or imposter syndrome, where is that coming up in my life? Where is it that I think there's a right way or a wrong way? Or where is it that I'm showing up as a victim? Or where is it that, this thing is coming up in my life? Then you can actually get a ton out of group coaching that you wouldn't otherwise get. I will say in this last round of ongoing presence, multiple people have inspired other people. And not that I want any of you to leave your jobs, but it's the season for people who are like, well, this person told me this story and I just gave my notice. And because when I heard their story of how they were being treated and how they responded, I was like, oh my God, like, what am I doing? And so sometimes watching someone else get coached through it and watch their brain sort of see it and begin to see it helps your brain see it. And sometimes that's easier than getting coached yourself because your brain isn't quite ready to let it in or quite ready to say, wow, I know that I've needed to make a change, but I'm too nervous to invest, or I'm too afraid to, dip the toe into something new, or I'm too afraid to quit. Since we were talking about that at the beginning, like I'm too afraid to do that. And then you watch someone else do it and they did it successfully and they got coached through it. You can you're using all those tools for yourself. And then they also learn from your experience. So there's benefits to both. I don't think there's a right answer. If you've never done any one-on-one coaching, I do encourage people who do the groups to do a couple, because I do think, and that's why I offer, like, you can do, if you do 6 months of ongoing presence, you can do 3 one-on-ones or the once a month, whichever works for you, because I think getting a little bit of that personal attention to dive into what's really your issue and your struggle can be really helpful. Sandra, do you have any thoughts on that? Because I know you've only had one-on-one as part of the retreat, but it was short. But I'm curious what your thoughts are since you've done it. You're the only one here that's done it.
Well, first of all, I would highly recommend to anybody to go to any of Jessie's retreats. I've only experienced the Sagrada, which is the longest one, but it was just amazing. Not just the great food, the beautiful environment, the yoga, and the community of women, but the coaching was fantastic. The one-on-one, actually, after doing the one-on-one, I felt like I wanted more. But you know, I'm still, I guess that's why I'm here. I'm kind of dipping the toe again
Yeah.
to see if I want to
Well,
do that
and
in
lots
the
of people
future.
do that. So they'll come to a retreat and then they'll join ongoing presence and do one-on-one coaching. Or
Yeah.
I guess this person wasn't at your retreat, but people will come to the retreat and they'll do their one-on-one coaching afterwards. Some people do one-on-one coaching and then they go to the retreat. There isn't a right path. It's like what works for you and your life and your timing, because we all have different things going on. Maybe you can't leave home, or maybe you can leave home. Whatever works for you is the way forward.
I thought it was a great introduction to both. So I'm glad I went to the retreat because I got to experience the group and the individual all at one time. And then that gives you a great sense of kind of where you want to start with it. But I agree. I think you can't go wrong either way. But and I had never thought of doing both actually at the same time, like you were saying today.
So I actually came up with that as the ideal way to do it. And I actually think it is the ideal way to do it. But many people, I used to just do one-on-one, and then many people want to do ongoing coaching more sustainably. And so that's where the group began, but they did not want to give up their one-on-ones. And so we did group twice a month and then one-on-one a month. And so that sort of gave them their one personal check-in for like, these are all my issues. And I have people who've been doing that for 3 years, and it's just like their personal maintenance, healthcare, mind maintenance, as opposed to like preventive care. But I also think some people do it every other month. It really depends what's going on in your life. And maybe I have people that go literally, they go from one-on-one, they go to group, they go back to the one-on-one because that's what works for their life and their job and whatever else they might be doing at the time. And so to me, and it's not that you don't graduate. I actually just did a podcast, and it will come out shortly, with someone who really has graduated. Because people say, does anyone ever graduate? Some people, they do one round of coaching and they're like, that was what I needed. And I got what I needed, and I got out of these old stuck mindsets, and I don't need any more. Other people, it's like layer upon layer. There's more things under there. Or they'll come and they'll do 6 months and then they'll take a break and then they'll come back. Like, we're all on our own journey. I still get coached, not regularly, but I still need it. And I'm like, oof, I'm really like, my brain has gone in a spin. I need, like, to me, it's like, I'm a pediatrician. So it's getting your child is off course, your toddler. It's like getting your brain back on course. It's like, oh, I just need a little redirect. And the more skills you have, the more you can use them. And there are many people who get to a point and they're like, wow, this is what I needed. And my brain is in a new spot. And now I'm going forward in my life in a different way. So those are often people who've changed their jobs or really figured out a passion that's not their medicine. Maybe they've kept their same job, but they've really sort of found a way to be more whole and happy in their life. So I don't think there's a right or a wrong way. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. Thank you. Yeah.
But I would figure out what works for your life and do that. Honestly, like our doctor brain is going to tell you that one is better than the other, and that it has to be this way or that way. And what I really think is dip a toe in and you can figure it out that way. Sometimes, if I know you a little bit better, like I actually know Sandra pretty well, like I know what I would know more about what her brain needs. And so, but I think, part of what we were taught in medicine is also not to listen to our gut and not to listen to what we think might be best for us and think that there's some other better way and someone else knows better. And so just realize that, like, think, well, what do I really want or crave? What do I feel like I really need? And listen to that. And remember that you were taught not to, and you were taught to think that you'll probably make a mistake and that would turn out badly. That's the skepticism. And so once you see that, you're like, oh, I'm on to myself. What do I really want to do? Another tool that is a coaching tool, but is to ask your future self, like in January of 2024, and things are going well and you've gotten unstuck and the coaching has been helpful. We're just going to take that. What would that version of you recommend you do now? And you usually know the answer. You're like, oh, and then it's like, how do I make that happen? But that's what I would say is that version is usually like, you wish you had done one-on-one, or you wish you'd done group, or you wish you had something. And usually you may not know the exact details, but consulting your future self is one of my favorite tools. And it's actually what helped me pivot in my career. I asked my 60-year-old self, I was 50, 49, 50. And I was like, what will you wish you had done? And instantly knew the answer. I was like, oh, well, that's a no-brainer. It gets you out of that like fear, what if I make a mistake? And that's you saying, well, things have turned out okay. Like you don't have to know all the details, but you are intact and healthy at 60. What will you wish you had done at 15? It's like, oh, I know. I had no doubt about what I wished I had done. So hopefully that's helpful. Anybody else have any questions? So I'm happy to jump into a little bit of coaching if anybody wants to get coached. And if I think Sandra's the only person here that I know has had coaching. And really what it is you just bring up something that you're struggling with. And it doesn't have to be like the whole big thing I'm struggling with my whole life, or it's, this one thing is frustrating me, or I'm trying to make a decision about X. And obviously, in a shorter session, you're just kind of dabbling with it to see like, well, how does this help me think about something differently? So it doesn't have to be complicated. Often it's the smallest, tiniest thing that helps you see the power and gives you the greatest shift. And I will say that a lot of the times that coaching has been the most helpful is it has been a tiny, tiny thing that I got coached on that all of a sudden opened up this whole watershed. And I'll give you an example. I got coached on money once, and this thought that I had that I wasn't good at money. And the person that was coaching me actually was talking about, well, do you have a house and do you have a retirement? And I had sent a child to college, and do you have a car? She was like, I think you're good at money. And I was like, I never thought about it that way. Like I had this whole story about how I didn't know all about it. And so it was this really simple thought that made a huge difference for me. And so sometimes, again, it's like some simple thought that's getting in the way. The other thing that I'm wondering, just because I know a little bit about a couple of you, is one of the other tools that really helped me is I realized that a lot of the thoughts that I had when I was thinking about making changes in my life were thoughts of my parents that they have about changing careers and taking risks and doing things outside the box. And so what I realized is that if I continued to think the way that they thought, I would get their results. And that is what we teach in coaching. And so I was like, oh, this is my dad's thought. It's not my thought. And once I realized that, I was like, I don't want his result on this. I want my result. So I have to think my thought, which is different, if that makes sense. So, and yeah, Sylvie, we can talk about that. And Sandra, I saw that you messaged and now I can't see it. So I don't know where it went. So it was important. Send it to me again because it's gone. I don't know what happened. I got it and opened it and then it wasn't there. So, and so in terms of the cost, it depends what you decide to do. If you do all one-on-one, if you do one-on-one with group, or if you do the groups are slightly different costs because they are, one has more sessions and is longer and one's a little bit shorter. So the groups are about, and I don't actually remember all the exact prices, the groups are about 3,000 and the one-on-one is about 5,000. And depending on how many one-on-ones, if you're doing only one-on-one, and then if you're doing some combination, they vary thereof. You do get CME for all of them. So some people are able to use some of that funding for it as well. And you don't have to get CME, but if you want it or it helps, you can. You have to go through the process of answering the surveys and doing that at the end. And the CME is based on a couple things. It's based a lot on our thought patterns that we have that lead to burnout, and the thought patterns, those same thought patterns actually impact, if you think about like self-doubt and imposter syndrome and shame, blame, and guilt and how they impact your amygdala, they impact patient care essentially. So the questions end up going in that direction. I have never found that we've not covered the objectives, whether you do one-on-one or group, although in the last session, I just make sure we cover anything that maybe we haven't covered to make sure that, you can fill out your survey and get your credit if you need it. And so, and the way that the groups go over a very specific range of time. We meet about twice a month as a group. And then depending on how many one-on-ones you'll do that. If you just do one-on-one, it's usually about every other week that we meet. I will say that I don't run people through like a course, even in the groups. I really make it specific to the group. And I think Sandra could see that at the retreat, right? It's who's there and what they're working on. And those are the topics that we talk about. So I don't run you guys through a checklist, or each week you don't have a module of videos to watch, because that drives me crazy. And so I like to make it very personal. And so most people, every other week is about the right time course for their one-on-one coaching, if they're not doing group, because I want you to have enough time to integrate. So my idea is not to do every week and push you through it. I want you to practice, and I actually want you to mess up and get stuck and have bad things happen, so you can come back and get coached on those, so that by the time you get to the end of the 6 weeks, it's not 6 weeks, but 6 sessions it's usually over 3 months, you have a lot of tools and a lot of resources, and you've bounced around through different experiences trying them out. There are things that people do in between those sessions that I will give you to work on, and it really depends on what you are struggling with. So there's a whole secret back part of the website that you get access to when you're doing those things. And there's resources and other things that I send you to. Although sometimes I just give you personal homework, because I prefer that, again, from the efficiency standpoint of this is what you're working on and this is what you need to explore. And so most people send me that as well. So there's work that you're doing in that realm as well. That makes sense. So Sandra, did you want coaching? Because I don't know what happened to your message. I lost it. So.
No, I think it was sent by somebody else, but I'm good.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I want to give other people opportunity to get coached, to experience it. But if nobody has anything, there's always something
I know
that I could talk about.
I'm quite sure. Does anyone else want to bring up something they're struggling with, just to see what it's like?
Sure.
Yeah, go for it, Sylvie.
All right. So I actually just finished Thrive Academy with
with Siobhan.
Yeah,
Okay,
with
wonderful.
Siobhan, which was excellent. And I think you guest spoke at one of the coaching,
Yes.
and it kind of, resonated with me, because I am looking at I am retiring from my day-to-day family practice in 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a whole bunch of things that are kind of bubbling around, of things that I'd like to do or explore, but I don't have a lot of bandwidth to do that now. And I'm not stressed about that, in the sense that I'm like, you know what, once I do, there's no urgency for me to jump into something else. But what I'm fearful of is I'm married to a high-tech engineer. My kids, I have one that's moved out, one that's going to be graduating university next year, one that's 16, who's my introvert, who's my challenge, because he's an introvert. And I just am like, okay, so if I'm not going to work every day, and my husband on the emotional side, at work, my colleagues and stuff, they're touchy-feely, we're all very close, we're all, and my husband, so I guess I sort of want to work on how to best sort of communicate with my husband and let him know what I need, because I think a lot of times he just doesn't get it. I'm like, okay, you know what, like, I need a hug now, and he's like, right now? Like, I'm like, oh yeah, right. So just that, so that's kind of an issue. And then with not going into my practice, just finding that element elsewhere, or
well, and partly your brain is going to say that you can't find it elsewhere, and I would say, what if it's easy for you to find it elsewhere? Right. And that I think sometimes we think we don't have bandwidth, but you could dip a toe in to find it elsewhere and just try some things that you enjoy. Because my guess is, if you like people and you like being out, and you hear this a lot, what am I going to do? I don't know. It's this worry. And I don't know a person who's had trouble. I think there's some reputation out there that, like, we don't, have any identity beyond our physicianhood. And I would say, first of all, you're going to be a physician no matter what. And you're going to think that way no matter what you do. But if you're a social person, you will very much find things that you enjoy doing with other people.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of trusting. When this podcast comes out in a couple of weeks of the woman who's graduated from coaching, you should really listen to it, because she actually talks about all the other creative things that she didn't even know she liked, that she's now discovered. And she didn't leave, she left her job, but she switched. She's a radiologist, and she now works every other week. And so now she has the time in between. She works these long hours, but every other week, to really pursue these other things that she just loves. And she's discovered a whole other side of her. And then it's okay to find those things. And so maybe gifting yourself, your brain is of course going to tell you that you're not going to find it. And you're of course going to look for all the reasons why this isn't going to work out well. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And even with, I will tell you that my youngest is a bit of an introvert. He's almost 18, but he's not like me at all. He's like my husband. It sounds like yours two are very aligned. And so in the house right now, I'm the noisy, chatty one, and they are not. And part of this in the coaching is accepting and allowing that, like, they are who they are and you are who you are. And so thinking about, we call it in coaching a want match. So finding your want matches for the people who like to chat and the book clubs and the like, oh, I just need a want match for that. Like, your want match is not at home for that. One thing that I think, I don't know too much about your husband, but high-tech engineer who doesn't know when you want to hug, I have an idea of a little bit about him. And so my thought would be, he may or may not be able to understand and pick up the cues, first of all. And I think that's really useful and has nothing to do with whether or not he loves you, right? No. And so part of this may be, we do a lot of work in coaching around a manual, which is our expectations for what a husband should do. He probably hasn't read your manual, and please don't share it with him. But you know what it is. And for me, knowing what was in my manual changed everything. And I was like, oh, of course he doesn't know all these things that are in here. And I really want him to. But when you want him to do something, what if you just told him, right? Because does he do it when you tell him?
Yeah. Yes, he does.
Right? Yeah.
Yes, he does.
I mean, not always, but most of the time.
And, and so I went through that whole experience of, maybe this is not the right person, blah, 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 blah. And then one day I came home and I said, okay, I want to go to Haiti on mission. And he looked at me and he said, oh, what do we need to do to make that happen for you? And I was like, wow, you're amazing. Because I'm not sure if the reverse was true.
You would
when
never
we had 3 kids, right? I would have been like, oh my God, you can't go there. It's unsafe. And, like, you're the father of my children. And like, I would worry, right? Like, he left for Shanghai today. And I'm like, right?
Yeah. One thing is actually to make a list of all the reasons why he's amazing for you. Like, isn't it great that he is an introvert? Yeah. He doesn't need to do all these things. So you can go out and do all the things you want.
Exactly.
And that he's logical. And he's like, oh, yeah, she wants to do that. I'm the logic guy. I'll make it happen. Like, and he's not the catastrophizer, by the way. He's just doing his thing.
No. Yeah.
Sandra's husband might be a little like that too, right? It's like, notice what they're really amazing at instead of why they're not meeting your needs. And so our brain is trained to look at why they're not meeting our needs. It makes our marriages a lot less fun. And so instead you can make a list of like why he's, and you don't have to go so far as amazing, but like what he does really well, for example, that can be a really helpful way to think about it also.
Good. All right.
And then notice your brain is just catastrophizing and you're thinking 2 years ahead here, right?
Yeah.
This is what our brain does. But in 2 years, I'm going to have this gap. And what am I going to do?
I'm actually super excited about that part.
Yeah.
I'm not actually worried about what I'm going to do. I am totally jazzed. Like, my plan from the get-go was Freedom 55. Okay. It's my plan and I can execute it.
Yeah.
And I'm super excited about all the things I can process. I just worry that, like we talked about a little bit, I worry about my reaction to my husband and wanting him to, my life is going to change significantly. He's not quite ready.
Right.
Don't know when, right? And so I don't want to become his little like, oh my God, oh, so today, blah, 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 when he's trying to work. And, so it's more about, like, I know I've got great friends. I've got retired friends. I cycle, I dragon boat, I do all of these wonderful things. I'm not concerned that way. I'm part of a palliative care project, which I will be able to devote more time to, which I'm excited about. But it's more on the relationship side. I'm like, ooh, what if, like, what the things he doesn't do will become so much more of an impact on me if I'm home? And I'm like,
what if they don't though?
Yeah.
What if it's
exactly,
actually useful because now you're still able to go do the other things you want? Your brain is looking for a problem.
Yeah.
Right. With kindness, our brains are, we're experts at that. We're just experts at it. But I do think just kind of seeing, the other thing is, if it does become a problem, you are kind of a professional problem solver. You can probably solve it, right? And you can probably find a solution from a more neutral place of, because your brain, if you're looking for like, how is he not going to meet my needs? How is this going to be more important later? It might become more important. So we talk a lot in coaching about what you practice grows. And so if you're practicing looking at this problem, the problem will grow and exactly what you're thinking will happen. So I suggest not practicing that thought. Practice the thoughts that it's gonna be amazing. And maybe when you're not working as hard, maybe there'll be more moments where you can connect in the moments that he's available, because maybe he's not available late in the day. I have no idea, I'm making this up.
But no, you're totally right. He's not available in the morning and I'm up in, like, I'm that 5 a.m. boing, 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 boing. And he's gone to bed at 2 a.m. because he has a team in China. And I'm like, but I just want to tell you about blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. So what if he's going to be more available at other times? Yeah. Okay. Beautiful. There's going to be something amazing there.
All right.
Love it.
Thank you.
Awesome. Victoria wanted some coaching, and I think Sumal, how do you say that? Sumul,
yes.
Sumul. Okay. I'll do you next. And Victoria, go ahead. And then if you're ready, or you can pass if you want Sumul to go next, either one. Whoever can unmute, let's see. You're still muted though, so I can't hear you.
Okay,
there you go. Okay, perfect.
Let me, do you guys hear me right? Because
yes.
Okay, no problem. Oh, so yeah, I'm Victoria. I'm just kind of jumping in. I'm new to the coaching. It's been, it's like you said, don't mention all my life. Basically, I want to coach. I have a choice to make, which we kind of already made, but I'm still uneasy with that choice. So the summary is, I have 4 kids and I'm basically single mom since August because my husband works since August in Mexico City. So we have option to move there since August. Most of his coworkers moved families there. And I have 4 children. They're not easy. I have a lot of problem right now with my almost 19-year-old in 1 month who dropped out of high school, has mental issues right now. I have a very difficult middle child who's doing great right now. And she just started high school. She just finished middle school, and I have 2 hours. So my main point, I went to see him for 3 days, first time since August. He came here for 1 week in December because he relocated. He has a wonderful apartment there. They pay for his everything there. They would pay for kids' school there. And he only can take vacations, which is like 3-4 weeks, right, over the year. So he took 1 week in December. He took a couple days in April, which I want to travel to Canada with my child. Basically, I saw him for 1 day in April. Okay. And this time I went there, we sat and we kind of figure out we have a wonderful still relationship, but we have a lot of problem with kids, And we talk and we line up everything which makes sense when he will come back, which was initial plan, when he can come back somewhere around December, when he finished 1 year contract, and he might hopefully secure maybe even online work, but we're not sure about that. So when we line out everything was sort of, I have a job there. I don't speak Spanish. I don't think I can practice medicine in Mexico, I practice in here. So I have a very good job here. Kids have routine, right? And my kids is not easy to get a new routine. We moved 3 different countries over the last 10 years. So anyway, when I was flying back, I really feel again, I just want to be with him. And I talked to him, and that's when I'm like kind of still torn between my wish, kind of when I rationalize everything, it makes sense when we're still here, when I feel like sort of things, I just want to be together, like as a family.
Is this temporary?
Yes, I mean, it is, but he always worked on assignments. Basically, he never worked in the United States for the last 10 years because I was only one.
Most of this is out of your control, right? I mean, you can go there for 6 months. Maybe you can take a sabbatical, but maybe you can't. And his work is out of your control. And
we really, if he choose it, he could have looked for a job here. The problem is, when we're talking about 6 months, we can live there for probably 2-3 years if we really want to. It's like, it's a 1-year contract, but it's going to be renewable. Most families think we're going to relocate there and stay there with like that project for 2-3 years.
Right. But you're wanting to know the outcome, and we don't know the outcome, right?
No,
so
I feel like, right, when I like imagine the story, I see the great idea when I was him together, but outside of the story, like you said, see what I am there, like even 6 months, I see kids losing all routine. I see kids losing.
But we don't know. My thought would be, we have no idea what's going to happen to kids.
Right, I don't, but I saw that from pandemia, how we disarranged everything. My kids couldn't adjust. That's I'm imagining based on my experience from pandemia,
Well, but so part of this is you, and I say this with kindness, but resisting the reality of the fact that right now your husband has a job in Mexico City, and you are not in Mexico City and can't practice medicine there, and you have 4 children with different levels of needs.
Right.
So what I would ask here, well, there's a couple things. One is focusing on what's in your control. So you can decide to go, you can decide to stay, but you can't know the outcome of doing that, right? So you can only make the best decision you can with the information you have in the moment. That's one of my favorite sayings in medicine, in life, because our brain wants to say, well, if I go and it turns out well, it was a good choice. And if I go and it turns out badly, it was a bad choice. And so making a choice and deciding to have your own back. The other thought is you can stay and say, this is, you can come back, and you're wanting it to be different. So he's there, you're here, and you have these 4 children and you practice medicine. And so again, just deciding, like, you have to decide to be in one or the other. This angsty spot is causing lots of discomfort.
I was okay until lately. I made the decision. I was fine with that decision. I was so in that I just find out myself more and more burnout, right? Lately, like, it's like I start to feel. Why are you
not okay now?
Because it's just, because I was doing like 4 children and full-time job, and my children has a lot of activities, and there was like some people who helped me, but they not another parent. I cannot be a dad and a mom.
Right.
Because we are 2.
And so what's in your control there? Can you get more, like, so I love this question, what's in your control?
Right.
Can you get more help? Can you decide it's going to
be? I'm getting more and more help. I just don't feel like how it still can substitute him as a father.
Right. It can't. So part of this is what I would say, accept and allow that the situation is not going to be perfect right now.
Right. No,
Right. And you can ask for what you want, maybe him to come back in 6 months or in August, I think you said, or just whatever, but he may or may not do it. And so part of us is like, we want it all to work out just perfectly. And so I would look at, well, what is in your control? To ask him to come back, to stay where you are, to go there. And recognizing you don't have to like it. That's the other thing. You can accept and not like the situation. That's one of my favorite things. I'm not a radical acceptance person. Accept and don't like it. Feels way better.
Right.
Much, much better. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I mean, we made a decision. It just like, I just try, and I guess, like you said, maybe I just need more and more help and take more and more leave until then, because I mean, we made decision when he comes back in December, right?
That's part of the thought process here too, is this is temporary, because our brain wants to say like they're not with their dad, and this will happen and that will happen, and he's never going to be here, and I'm never going to make it. And so there may be some things I also like to point out that are easier without dads around. Like I might start to look at that. Like, is there anything that's
that's a good point. That's a good point. I tell you, I have my husband, and that's a good point, because we have a perfect relation.
I'm not trying to knock him, by the way, but
right.
It's going to make you feel better in the short term.
I mean, I hear you, because when he comes, apart from like being 2 perfect days, you know, I know it's going to be like sort of another child in my possession, right? I mean, he's wonderful, right?
Might be to make a list for yourself of things that are easier when he's not there. Not because you don't love him, not because you don't want him there.
I hear you.
Might also decide like there are good things about him being gone and bad things about him being gone, and let your brain give equal time to both.
No, I think I'm kind of, I think like to be more at peace. Like, again, I was sort of keep torn, but I think like I'm coming to the sort of acceptance and the fact when I can make it happen, like you said, to accept things while he's not here. I kind of believe the kids is easy to manage while they're here, for sure. I just cannot imagine them living in fancy 3-bedroom with 4 kids. It's versus like 5-bedroom house now with all their needs and wants, you know. It will be far from perfect, and a dog and a cat if it moved that there. So that's how I picture that. But I think I just have to go there more often, you know. I just have to arrange kind of them to stay here, and just
in your control is to go there more
right.
often.
That's control. That's what I mean.
That might be the perfect thing. Have a date weekend once a month,
right?
And let everyone else be where they are.
I mean, that's what I did. I left them with like friends, paid them for that. Like, and I left the country. I have no family here, so I really left them with my like trusted friends, and we took care of them. And it worked.
Turned out okay, right? Turned out okay.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, again, my one of the child ride horses. I was like praying, you know, but I came and spare everybody life, so that was happy for me enough, you know.
I think trying to think creatively about it and saying,
that's what
like,
I do.
This is a great situation, but what is in my control? What's better than I think? Because what that will do is when you're out of the victim mode and the threatened mode and this is terrible mode, your brain will start to think of creative solutions. And so that's where something that you haven't thought of, like I can go there, or something that'll give you a little more spaciousness. When we're like this, we can't think of the solutions. That's we're just reacting. And so that's where the mindfulness and upregulating your parasympathetic nervous system will help your brain begin to come up with something that you haven't thought of before. So start with that. Yeah, it helps.
Sure.
Beautiful.
Okay,
all right.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Sumul, go ahead and unmute.
Hi. So I'm a dentist and not a GP specialist like you guys. So some dilemmas may be the same.
They're very much the same.
Yeah.
Happen to know.
So one of the things that have been kind of coming up within the last year or so, dentists are more solitary, don't really work with someone else. It's just you and the support staff. Recently, the other colleague that worked different days has been added to my day. He's a male. And something that I wasn't aware of before is how much the entire staff caters to him. Mind you, he's not as experienced as me, but they cater to him. Whatever he asks once it's done, he has temper tantrums. I have heard from people, and yet it is okay. Yet when I ask for something to be done, I have to ask 100 times before it gets done. And sometimes it's perceived that, you know, I am too exacting, that I am too demanding. It's so hard to find that line to kind of get this thing done. And you can't really get pissed because you getting upset doesn't translate the same way as him getting upset. And they're scared. It's like, oh, we can't upset him. He'll get mad. I'm like, well, what about me? I don't like the same things that are going wrong for me. And then kind of like a part and parcel of that. And I'm not someone who's explosive emotionally at work. I'm usually very even keel, regardless of how I'm feeling on the inside.
Right. Right.
And
well, one thought I have for you is, I like to say it isn't fair. It's not right. Like, gift yourself that, okay? Because somehow we're like, well, should I convince myself it's right? Like, no, just say it's not fair. It shouldn't be this way. One of my favorite coaching thoughts is it should be different, okay? But I can still make a difference. And so then I'm going to ask you, take that last part. How can you still make a difference, even if it should be different? Any thoughts?
How can I make a difference in what?
Just the situation, right? Because right now your energy is frustrated because it's not fair, right? And it's, first of all, it's totally reasonable. So I would say, like, you're in victimhood, except you are a victim. So I'm not saying you're not a victim, but when we come as the victim, we don't get what we want.
Right.
Okay? And this isn't that it's your fault, because it just should be different. Women are treated differently, and it's not right and it's not fair. So I'm giving you that, right? But when we come with a different energy, we actually get more of what we want. And so my hope is just to get you a better deal, and to, even if you don't get a better deal, to feel better, because you will feel better, and that's a win. And then when we ask for things from different energy, we tend to get different results.
Right.
When you come from like, this is not fair, like, even if on the outside you look fantastic, on the inside, as you mentioned, we still have that energy and it's still coming with you.
Right.
And so part of the mindfulness piece, this isn't quite the right energy for you, but I just will gift you this idea. Sometimes people will come like a tree, okay? Like a graceful, elegant, beautiful oak tree. I don't know exactly where you're from, so hopefully you have oak trees, but if not, pick some other tree that's beautiful, that you know, that's like graceful and elegant, and maybe a little old and lumpy and bumpy and not perfect, but like, those trees don't whack back when things aren't fair. They stand there and but they're very proud and very strong. And so I have people sometimes generate that energy when they're going to a meeting where they know that, like, with the bad guys is what I like to say, right? I always say the suits, but that's maybe not nice. But when you're going into that kind of thing, you want to choose your energy with intention. And so my thought is, when you're sitting here thinking, he didn't used to be on my day and now he's on my day and he's this difficult person, first of all, you don't have to like him. You don't have to like that he's on your day, and you absolutely shouldn't like that they treat you differently, because it's not right. But your work is to say, how do I want to show up for this? How can I make a difference in my experience of the situation? Not how can you change him or how can you change them, but how can you change your experience? And the reason I say that is, when we change how we show up, all the other people start to change too. Not exactly how we want them to, but we were taught to come in and like tell them how to be. That actually doesn't work as well as coming in with like, the other word that comes to mind rather than a tree is elegant, like a strong, elegant leader, where you're just like, you're not waffled. This doesn't bother you. Because when we ask in that tone, it's the tone and energy that's in your control. He's not, the other people aren't. Maybe if they work for you, you are, but I know that in practices, they don't usually work for us. They work for other people. And there's all this confusing leadership, etc. Does any of that resonate?
It does. So what I've been trying to do of late kind of is to tell myself that, you know, I'm fortunate that I have this support staff, that, you know, I'm lucky that I have this job, that I'm remind myself of the things that I'm happy about.
Yeah.
And then there are people, you know, who I enjoy working with. And something that I've, you know, heard about in other coaching or, you know, seminars, if you will, is that, you know, when you acknowledge, and I'm someone who really truly believes in, you know, when someone does something right, I want them to know, because I'd like to know myself. So, but to be more cognizant of that and to do that on a more regular basis. So then when I do ask for something, it's not just that I asked, it's because I have also been patting the positive and asking them to do something is not necessarily negative, but it's just like, oh,
And that helps. But I think having compassion for yourself, that you still don't have to like it, because we're sometimes actually mean to ourselves. Like, well, now I just need to be nice to everyone, and I need to be grateful, and I need to feel lucky, and my situation is better than 90% of people. But we still then, it doesn't feel that good, because so I think allowing the fact that it isn't fair and you don't like it might soften the experience a little bit. So yes, you can give them praise for doing the right things. You can have gratitude, because gratitude releases positive neurochemicals and you'll feel better and everyone else will feel better. Does that make sense? So you might do that. There's no negative there at all.
Right.
But if you don't have compassion for yourself and the fact that this isn't fair and it doesn't feel good and you don't like it, you'll still be resisting. Does that make sense?
Right. And I think the epiphany, if you will, that came for me is because I have, for the most part, been by myself or whatever. I'm not someone who looks to think that this is going on. So that's the other thing. I mean, it may well have been happening. I just wasn't there on those days to observe it. So that's the difference. And it surprised me how glaring it was. So I think for a long time, I was just in shock. I'm like, I cannot believe that it's happening in my environment, because either I was oblivious before, or, because I'm not looking out for it, or didn't feel that it was affecting me. I didn't see it. And then suddenly it's so in my face and it's so obvious. And I think I was just like, I can't believe it. And I spoke to my colleagues and they're like, oh yes, it's very obvious.
Yeah. But notice that when you didn't see it, you felt better.
Oh,
so
yes.
you can decide, like, what we pay attention to also impacts our experience. So you can let it be. Sometimes we want to speak up. That's the other thing. Like, complain if there's an appropriate place where maybe it makes a difference. But if it's out of your control, or like the effort that you would, my thought is take care of you. I don't care about him. And I don't care what they do for him. Take care of you in a way that helps you be able to enjoy your life and your job more. And if sometimes, I'm a believer sometimes that, like, just ignore it because it feels better. Like when he was on the other day, you liked your job a lot better. Pretend he's on the other day.
That's what I kind of avoid him now. It's like, if I cross, they cross, but otherwise I'm like, I don't seek out to make interaction, whatever, just live in my own bubble.
Well, avoid him though from a place of empowerment. You're doing it because it's better for you, and that's just not cool. But like, not because you are hiding, or, you're doing it because you can enjoy your job if you just stay out of his way, and you can hope that he switches to another day. Quit soon.
Exactly.
The other thought I have here is laughter and humor is always good. So bringing that in whenever you can is helpful, especially in these situations at work where things might be out of your control. But like, even noticing how he does his antics, like one thought that I would giggle about, and I mean this with love, is like, of course he's pulling that again. Like, I would say that. I had a colleague I used to work with who would do things, and I would just be like, of course that's happening again. Oh, look how interesting, this is happening again. But didn't actually bother me. I wasn't like trying to change it or frustrated at that point. I was just noticing and kind of giggling within and saying, like, why would I expect something different? This is what always happens. And then it didn't seep into my cells and cause me pain, which is what I want for you. Now, coaching doesn't tell you to just accept crappy things though. So sometimes you need to speak up. And that's where I would say, if there is something in your control, or if there's something worth speaking up about, or like if it's abusive towards you or whatever, that then coaching doesn't say don't speak up and just take it. I always like to make that clear. But really, you're doing, I would say, what's good for me? What would bring me peace? Well, another phrase I use a lot in coaching is what would love do? And here it's what would love do for you, not for anybody else, but for you.
Thank you.
Sometimes that's speak up, sometimes it's go hang out in another room. You're welcome.
Right. Thanks.
Yeah, my pleasure. Nina, you had a question.
Yeah, I just thank you for bringing that up, Simone. I just feel like I'm dealing with that like in different ways, and it just like, and I get angry about it. And then I get resentful, and like I feel like I need to change the world and be like, they're assholes. And so but that doesn't help, does it? So
I would say take care of you.
Yeah.
That's within your power. And when you are better taken care of, sometimes we can also advocate for change better. When we come from this, like, we never get what we want. Sadly, it should be that way, but it's not. And you had asked, I think, about the difference between coaching and therapy. And therapy one is if there's pathology like depression, anxiety, you need to have that addressed by a therapist. And coaching really looks at, first of all, going forward. So here we are, these are all the things going on. Where do you want to go from here? So we take a lot of things as like, this is the way it is. And this is the thought patterns that you have and the habits that you have. And this is the situation that you're in. What do you want to do from here? We do look at these thought habit patterns that you might have because we happen to know about people who've been through certain trainings and certain life experiences, but we're not trying to fix or resolve any underlying pathology. So in fact, if you have depression or anxiety and they're not being treated, coaching actually doesn't work as well. It works fine if you're being treated and you're also seeing a therapist or you're also taking meds. But one of the things I have noticed over time is if you're not addressing that, the coaching is much, much slower and it just doesn't work as well. And so I will always tell people, if that's the case, you want to also be doing the other at the same time. They also tend to delve into the whys and the understanding. And in coaching, it's this sort of noticing and awareness. That's the mindfulness. But I use the word understanding, but it's really knowing where it came from. It's the noticing and the awareness. We don't care about the why. We just are like, this is here we are. What do you want to do about it? It's very proactive. And maybe solutions focused. So I would say the solution to me is about how you want to feel in life and how you want to enjoy your life and how you want to experience things. And so that's sort of the primary difference. Some people say like, well, coaching is all about thriving and living an aligned life and therapy is about surviving. There's lots of like different ways of thinking about it. But I like to think one is very proactive. And to me, it's about alignment and it's about choice and it's about agency. There are obviously things about both that overlap, right? And the coaching model is a little bit like CBT, but we don't dive into it and we don't have the same training. The other thing in coaching, and I always like to tell physicians this, as a coach, we are not empathetic. We don't dive into your story. We don't like get into the feels with you. In fact, our job is to actually not be that way. And so a lot of physicians are like, how come like that she's not being, I'm so sorry about that, but we're not supposed to, because it doesn't work well with the rewiring of the brain. And so I very specifically don't dive into that at all. And so I'm not trained as a therapist, but I think they show more empathy, but I'm not sure. So, and I will say, actually, not being a therapist, I don't know exactly which bent they take, but we actually do training on the difference between therapy. And one of the things I actually love being a physician is I'm really clear, like, hey, that's a mental health thing. You need to go get some mental health. Like, that is not what I deal with in coaching. And I very much tell people that with some regularity, like, I'm happy to coach you on this, but you need to get some mental health support with that. And that's what I see as my role, is to just identify it and say, sometimes I will tell people if they reach out and it's really clear that there's much more mental health and they're looking for coaching for mental health. I'm like, a coach is not actually what you need. You need to get mental health. And I think that that's a really important thing to be willing to say. It doesn't mean that you can't get coaching eventually, or you can't do them side by side. Sometimes you can't. But I think it's important to be clear on what's what. And sometimes we get into coaching and then something comes up and I'm like, ooh, this is like mental health. That's not something that's we don't coach on, you can't coach I'm thinking like serotonin and things like that. That being said, a lot of coaching looks at neuroscience and looks at like the way that thoughts work on your brain and the neurotransmitters that your brain releases. And so some of that we can actually do it. That's strategy though, right? That's not disease, it's strategy. And it's ways of sort of shifting to more or less. And so that is a way that coaching does make a difference. Anyone else have any last questions? So feel free to, oh, go ahead. Yeah.
Just a quick question. I know you said that people can get CME for this. Do you know if we can get CE for that? Well, because I mean,
yeah, maybe. If you know exactly, if you send me an email and tell me what it's called. So I know nurses and nurse practitioners can, but and so I just don't know what your letters are and if that. So it's AMA category 1 CME. Which is usable by like nurse midwives can use it, PAs can use it, but I don't actually know for dentists is what I'll tell you.
okay, thank you.
But if you send me the letters and or I can send you the accreditation and you can find out, but I'm not sure. My guess is maybe, but maybe not would be the other thought. So if you've ever been to a medical conference and been able to, but it's not like the CEs, I get questions about like psychologists and things like that. It's not that kind of continuing education. So.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So if you have other questions, feel free to email me about any of the, if you're thinking about groups or one-on-ones or you want my thoughts, I'm always happy to weigh in. The transition group, which might be helpful for some of you, is starting June 29th, I think. And then, and that group is really focused on people who are making change. It doesn't really matter what your change is. I have kind of pulled that group separately because I found that when people are in the midst of making change and a lot of the coaching around that, if you're not interested in making change or you're actually really wanting to be happy where you are, it creates a little bit of angst amidst the group. And so based on my 3.5 years of doing the groups, I love having 2 separate groups because it's really nourishing for the people who are transitioning to be in a group of people who are transitioning, and it feels very safe and supportive. And it's also nourishing for the other group, which isn't to say the other group actually this time has multiple people who are now actually transitioning, but they weren't at the beginning. And so the ongoing presence group will start, I think it's July 18th. So it's a few weeks later. And they basically both go to either November or December. It usually ends by the middle of December, and we meet twice a month as a group. And then some people do one-on-ones attached to that. And or if one-on-one feels like what you need, you can do that too. So either one. Reach out if you have questions, and if you have any other questions now, that's fine. And otherwise, I will see you guys all at some point soon. Thanks for coming. Nice to meet you. Nice to see you, Sandra.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jessie.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Nice to meet you.